Welcome back to Return to More. I'm your host, Jonathan Moore. Today's episode is entitled Workplace Chronicles, Healing from Workplace Trauma. For some of us, the topic of workplace trauma may hit close to home. We may have experienced directly, we may have experienced it indirectly. For many of us, we often tie our identities into work, and so when we experience trauma in the workplace, we have the potential to carry that trauma into other areas of our lives. But fortunately, there is hope. There's hope for how we navigate workplace trauma. There's hope for how we heal from workplace trauma. And then there's hope for how we as leaders can ensure that we don't contribute to workplace trauma. I'm so happy to be joined in this episode by one of my dearest friends, Dr. Rick Piwowarski. Rick is an education leader. He's a father, husband, best friend, all the good things. And more importantly, he brings to this conversation his years of experience as a leader in education finance, community service, philanthropy, and all things good around helping communities evolve. Before we welcome Rick to the show, I want to share a story about when I first encountered workplace trauma. You've heard me mention my father, and I'll talk more about him in future episodes. But as I mentioned, my father had an elementary school education. He was actually the son of sharecroppers. And so that's right, you're hearing, as I sit here before you in my 40s, I am one generation removed from sharecropping. And so given how my father grew up in Mississippi, he only attained a third grade education. So he wasn't very literate, but he was a hard worker and one of the smartest men I knew. My father had a best friend. We'll call him Chuck. My father and Chuck, homeboys, if you will. They worked together. Chuck had a company. My father would often help him out with construction, with just other tasks, and they bonded. It also helped that I went to the same high school as Chuck, obviously 40 years later, but nevertheless the same high school. My father's friend Chuck had a brother, and we'll call him Peter. Peter was a judge in the area that we lived. When I graduated high school, I was 17, ready to go to Loyola, excited to go to Loyola, but needed some money. I had no money, and I knew that I needed a job. So I went to my father, and I said, hey, I'm looking for work. Do you know of anyone who might be able to help or assist? Obviously, there were some options available either through retail or fast food. Didn't really want those. I needed something that was actually going to be somewhat lucrative, so I could head to Chicago with at least a decent amount of money in my pocket. So my father reached out to his best friend, Chuck. Chuck then reached out to his brother, Peter. And Peter said, yes, we can create this internship for Jonathan for the summer between him graduating high school and transitioning to college. And so I was excited. I did have sort of a love of law. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I declared my major as political science. So all things were pointed in the right direction. I get to intern as a bailiff. How exciting. So I started work in the courthouse as this intern, as this bailiff. So that's right. I got to actually be a bailiff. I got to escort individuals to and from the jail to the courthouse, from the courthouse to the jail. I got to, witness cases being argued. I got to witness oral arguments, both via the magistrate judge as well as the judge himself. So it's a really exciting time. Now keep in mind, I was 17. This was my first job in a professional setting. Now it wasn't that I wasn't used to professional settings. I mean, I grew up in church, so I was used to dressing up and comporting myself with a level of respect. I had been in other professional settings as well. The high school that I went to lent itself nicely to contributing to my awareness of what it meant to be in certain spaces that were serious, professional, and commanded a high level of respect and dignity. However, this was my first real job in a professional setting. And so in my mind, as a 17-year-old, I think, okay, jobs, what time? They start at 9, they end at 5. Most people in a professional setting, at least on TV, work 9 to 5. So about the first week or so, as I was heading to work, I was getting there, arriving at 9, and I did wonder somewhat, people looked like they had been hard at work for a little while. Now in my mind, there was no orientation. This is the adult Jonathan reflecting backward. There was no orientation. There was no one to, provide a schedule or necessarily say, hey, this is when you arrive, this is when you leave. There really wasn't even a conversation around my specific duties. I kind of just went, sat with the other bailiffs, and because I was smart, did what they did. And so that was my introduction. Well, one day I got to the office at 9, as I had typically done the days before. And we'll say the chief of staff of the office, I don't recall the specific title that she held, but she held the functions of it as the chief of staff. She managed all of the operations. She coordinated the judge's calendar. And so we'll call her the chief of staff, and we'll call her Susan. So I walk in, I go sit in the office with the other bailiffs, prepared to tackle the day as I had done the days before. Susan comes storming in and she says, "Who do you think you are?" And so I kind of like look around as if like, wait, who are you talking to? And she's like, "Who do you think you are?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry." And she's like, "You stroll in here at 9 o'clock." And I'm like, "Yes." She's like, "We start at 7:30. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, well, I could see how that would be upsetting, but who told me that? But I sat there in silence because part of how I was raised was, one, you respect your elders. Two, this job in essence was a favor, and there was no way I was going to embarrass my father because that was also something I was taught. But then third, I think I was stunned that she was speaking to me in this way. And she proceeded to go on about how we start at 7:30 and you don't get to come in here whenever you want. You don't get to do whatever you want. You need to make sure you're here on time. Got it? And I was like, yes. In sort of my stunned, dazed, and confused tone. Susan then left. And I remember sinking into my seat, and I try not to get emotional. You'll learn, those of you watching the podcast, I am a crier. My primary emotion is tears. I emote through tears, whether I'm happy or sad. But I remember sitting there sinking in the seat, and the other bailiffs, the whole office just sort of paused what they were doing. If you imagine in the movies where people are working and there's noise and then a big event happens and all of a sudden there's silence, that's what it felt like. All throughout the main office where the clerks were, the other staff was, it was as if people were typing on their computers, and then the moment she started yelling at me, like they stopped. And so then when she finished yelling at me, the other bailiff said, that's just how Susan is. Don't take it personal, man. And I was like, okay. And keep in mind, this is the young 17-year-old me, just happy to be there, knowing my father did this favor, was not going to embarrass him, certainly wasn't going to complain or draw attention to what happened. So I held it inside. I told no one. I will say, reflecting back as an adult, that was the last interaction I had with Susan. So the adult analysis tells me that while I didn't complain or tell anyone, someone must have said something that I was unaware of, so much so that for the remainder about 6 weeks that I was there, I had zero interaction with Susan. Didn't see her, didn't talk to her, just had zero interaction. Another byproduct of that was I got to work by 7:30 every day. So that was one way to tell me to be on time. But as I replay that experience back as an adult, there were a few things that were foundational. One, that was the first place where I have felt trauma, where I was embarrassed, where I was spoken to disrespectfully for something that I had no knowledge that I was doing incorrectly. The adult me also says that perhaps there was a perception that because I got this internship that I was there because of my father, which was true. There's very few nepotism strands throughout my life, but that's one that I'm certainly proud of. I was there because of him. But I also was a graduate of the premier high school in the area, and I was headed to a premier college in the region. So this wasn't as if, I didn't have the acumen or the skill set to be worthy of this internship. But also, when I think about how it shows up with me now, how trauma has carried with me, these last nearly 30 years, I think about who Susan represented. And so Susan identified as a white woman. She was probably in her 50s. And here I was, this young Black man in the twilight of my teenage years. And so while I thought I had suppressed that experience, I would go on throughout my career struggling in different places with supervisors or bosses that I had who identified as her. Not necessarily because they treated me the same way or they talked to me the same way, but the trauma that I didn't resolve because I suppressed it and didn't discuss it, and in many ways alluded to dealing with it internally, it has shown up over the course of my professional life. And so, for better or worse, there are patterns that I am able to recognize, whether in personality or in actions. And there are some things I've had to forgive myself for because it's not fair to carry the trauma of that experience into current situations. And so as I share that story, I'm excited to turn into our conversation with Rick today about how do we heal from workplace trauma. Rick, welcome to Return to More.
Jonathan, thank you for the invitation. I'm excited. I can just imagine 18-year-old Jonathan in an open room and being yelled at by this lady and the poise and dignity of today in there.
Well, thank you. There was a lot of fear then.
Yes.
I don't know if that happened today. I think I would have gladly collected my things and left after responding in kind. No, not very Christ-like.
You meet people where they are. You meet her where she was.
You meet them where they are. Not very Christ-like, but you meet them where they are. Before we dive into the conversation, I want to take a point of personal privilege. One, I'm so happy you're joining us today. And to those who might be listening, I just have to say a few things about Rick. Rick is one of my closest friends for nearly 20 years. And when you think about people who will literally give you the shirts off their back, Rick is one of those people. He comes from a great family. He's been so supportive. He loves life. He's hilarious, in case you haven't already gotten a sense of. He's incredibly smart, and he is like a brother to me. And so I want the audience to know all those good things. And so you have to excuse me. Right. Laughter through tears is my favorite emotion, saying,
Amen,
was it Still Magnolias? One of those movies. Okay. Before we get into the heart of our discussion, I did not ask you this beforehand, so I know you might not have prepped, but I'm going to ask you to go back into the archives. Think about one of your earliest memories of our friendship. What comes to mind?
So I won't use the name. So there was, we were in a fraternity together, and you were assigned a big brother. It was not me. Yes. And I remember so I'm waiting. So Loyola of today is not Loyola of 2000 and what, 2, 3, 4.
I've heard. Thanks to our student loan payments.
Amen. Right. So, Father Garanzini, where he took that place in 20 years, right? It's just a whole different space now. So, for those of them who are at Loyola now, this won't make any sense. But we were at the bus stop. Remember, they had the bus stop, that shuttle, and shuttle is a generous term. It was a school bus that was painted maroon and gold, right? It wasn't even modified.
30,000 a year.
Yes, and they would pick you up at the corner by between like that chemistry building and security or public safety or whatever they called it. And then it came every 15 minutes, sometimes every hour. You never really knew. So you just got there when you got there and hoped to God that you weren't on the red line or had anywhere you had to be, right? So I remember. Yes. I remember I was waiting there and I looked over and I saw you. I didn't really, because I had met you maybe once or twice previous to this. And you had just like beelined across that street and you're like, excuse me. I'm like, yes. He's like, are you an SAE? I go, I am. I was like, do you have a moment to talk? And I said, sure. So then we got to talking and you relayed some experience that like the other day, you're like, I was talking to him and he just walked away from me. I'm like, what do you mean he walked away? It's like, we were mid-conversation, he turned and he just walked away from me. And I don't know how I'm supposed to grow in this community if the person who's supposed to introduce me to it just walks away from me.
He was an odd fellow, as we've come to learn.
Bless his heart. So that was the first foray into the Jonathan Prescott Moore. Yes.
Yeah, who would
And
have thought there'd be many moments?
and as scary as, like, you carry your life with you. So you were in that space. You were because again, remember there were those people who went, our classmates, right? Who had classes in the city, who either went as if you were in college or tried to like dress up to the max. And like, I'm just trying to get down to the city, but you were dressed up. So you walk over, you had like slacks on, like a formal coat. I'm like, what is going on? And then you're like, I don't mean to overstep or be inappropriate. However, I need to share with you an experience I had. And then as soon as you said, I go, who is it? And you mentioned, I go, yeah. Makes sense.
You affirmed. Yeah. You have no idea. That was an important
How can I help you?
Yeah. One, it said that I wasn't crazy. And then two, I think it started us on our path of our friendship.
Yes.
Because I knew it once. I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew you weren't crazy. You were kind of the only few who actually weren't crazy.
Oh yeah.
But
yeah.
God bless them and all those who love them. Yeah, no, I remember it. It's funny you talk about our time at Loyola, which I know that's not what we're here to talk about, but we'll at some point get into that conversation eventually.
Trauma.
Yeah. Yes. Go forth and set the world on fire. It's like
it's hard to set it on fire when you are on fire yourself, trying to figure out how to put my own blaze out.
Yeah. Being told, oh, you don't have enough money for tuition, you should transfer.
I have 120 credit hours. I just need 4 more, so we're not going anywhere.
Right. I guess I'll take out another loan with a 30% interest rate for this last credit hour.
What is the tuition rate? You don't know yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when you figure out, you let me know. And
yes. And I'll just say we're partially embellishing. Partially embellishing. There's lots of witnesses who could attest to
15% exaggeration.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Let's get into workplace trauma. So you've been leading teams for years within the field of education and many different contexts, across many different contexts. So when it comes to workplace trauma, what does that mean for you? What do you think of when you hear the term?
So in my experience, so when I say my experience, it's both so this is my 20th year in education, and I was a teacher for 8, and then I've been in various leadership roles at the school and system level for 12 of those years. And then because of that, I've got a pretty wide range of connections with leaders in a variety of school settings across the country. So when I say my experience, it's a combination of both my professional experience in my role, various roles, as well as shared living witnesses of what I've seen and heard from other leaders in similar situations or similar dynamics. And so for me, workplace trauma is distinct from everyday dissatisfaction or everyday conflict. And I think workplace trauma is also different based upon the role in which that person is in. And so I think when I say workplace trauma as a leader, the trauma from my experience is not particularly isolated events. I think, like to your example earlier, as the intern, those individuals in those roles and those power dynamics are much more likely to experience trauma, I think, in isolated experiences. They all lead together. I think for people in leadership roles or kind of the larger your scope goes in an organization, it's much less the direct specific occurrences, but it's much more of a systemic sort of personal attack. And so for me, I look at workplace trauma as something that is a series of situations caused by a human source to which you are the target. And I think what differentiates, so often you hear, especially leadership roles, employees will come to you and they'll say, I'm experiencing trauma in the workplace. And you ask them what it is. And you don't want to minimize their experience, but oftentimes it's, this group gets together for lunch and I'm isolated. Okay. That could be trauma, or they could just be bad people. There was a Christmas party that this team had, and I was not invited to it. That could be trauma, or they could just be a bad group of people, or they may not like you, or whatever that might be, right? I think for it to be traumatic, it has to do 3 things. One, it has to be a series of events. I think it has to really make you begin to question your own identity as a person, as a leader. You start questioning your vocation, your purpose, your role, your fit. I think when the behaviors start to cause those reactions within you, that to me is more of a workplace trauma experience.
Yeah, so you've said some few salient things that I think we'll come back to. You talked about the systems, the introspection, and then the impact on your actual work. So let's, at the leadership lens right now, let's think as a leader. You've talked to us about like how we can identify what would be some signs So like you've given us the
Mhm.
definition. So I'm a leader. I have this definition, but what would be signs that
Sure.
I'm experiencing trauma versus just like people don't like me?
So a close colleague slash almost friend of mine recently became a principal of a school in California, and he has been in leadership roles in a variety of capacities, but always at the second level. So the assistant, secondary, deputy. This is this person's first foray into a building-wide leadership role. In the first semester, as everyone knows, is very rocky, but it is a very challenging environment, quasi-toxic almost, borderline toxic environment. He is the sixth principal in probably 9 or 10 years, so that right there is a concern in and of itself. And in our conversations, what he's manifesting to me are he's on the receiving end of things that are making him question if he's qualified for the role. Of course, you're qualified for the role. You wouldn't be there if you weren't. But the behaviors make him question his qualifications, making him question, is he an appropriate fit for that community? Making him question, is he even meant to be in education? I think when those core issues start manifesting, those core challenges, that to me is symbolic of actual trauma,
I think
because
so many
it's going
people.
to the attack of, it's not
Yeah,
just his APs are not supportive. They could just
yeah,
be not supportive, or with a thousand reasons, right? It's when the APs are not being supportive, and he's starting to question: is he even leading them appropriately, or more importantly than that, should he even be in that role? I think once you start having those questions, then you got to stop yourself and say, "Hold on, this is more than just." An uncomfortable environment. It's more than just interpersonal dynamics. There's something more there.
yeah. What as you're talking, I'm thinking of many things, but one thing, the idea that the trauma can definitely play at the essence of who you are. You can spend so long building yourself up and doing the right thing and following the right path. And it takes a single environment to make you question your worth or the
All of it.
essence of who you are.
Yes, yes, and I think the thing that's also, I think, that differentiates, because again, in leadership roles, especially when you're supervising and leading and responsible for employees, especially in today's society, right? It is very easy for us to throw words around all the time: toxic workplace, hostile work environment, and you'll see that everywhere you go. So I think it's really important to start centering, like, what does these terms mean? How do they look? How do they manifest? And I think also one of the differentiators between, like I said to this person, he's in it's Southern California. It is, and I said, or quasi toxic. And by that, what I mean is, I don't necessarily think workspaces can cause trauma. I don't think an institution can cause trauma. I don't think policy can cause trauma. I think what separates an uncomfortable workspace or a poor fit is really the human behavior. So I think
Say
workplace
more.
trauma
Say more.
centers on there is a human. There has to be, you can't, a policy is impersonal. An institution is impersonal. As much as you try to make them personal, it is institution. It's a third party generic substance on purpose, right? I think it's less about disliking a policy and more about being placed in a position where you're starting to question those ideas because a person is causing that to happen to you. And it could be a person of power. It could be a person who's not in power. It could just be whatever there is. But I think it's a human-driven behavior that attacks a person's sense of identity.
So it's funny you mentioned that. So on the recent episode, as part of this Workplace Chronicles series, I featured a guest, and we talked about navigating difficult colleagues. And so as you're talking about the factor that individuals or that people or teams or groups play in contributing to workplace trauma, um, the guest in the previous show, she mentioned, she said, we're all somebody's asshole. Meaning, we all show up to work and someone has disdain or contempt or dislike for us for whatever the reason is. And we may not be intentional in being the asshole to that person, but they're just sometimes personality conflicts. So I guess my question for you as we talk about people, can you give us some insight into what role does personalities play or, excuse me, do personalities play or interpersonal awareness around workplace trauma?
So that's an excellent question. I think it's also very difficult. So again, on one hand, I've always operated from the vantage point of people's opinions of you are none of your business. And that's, I think, a good safeguard. But
Can
I
you say
also
that
think that
again?
so people's opinions of you, their thoughts of you, their perceptions of you are their business, not yours. And I think once you allow yourself to enter into what are they thinking of me, that really, again, so that's the symbol of trauma. That's a huge indicator. But also it gets very dangerous because then you're starting to give yourself to the group. You're starting to allow yourself to be controlled by the group. And so when it goes to personalities and conflicts, I think that the inherent challenge is separating a professional relationship and a personal relationship in that space. And also having sort of these benchmarks around these guardrails around what you will and won't tolerate or accept from other individuals. And so a person may not like you as a person, but that's their business, not mine. And if you want to have the conversation, we can, but I don't know how me as a person and you as an employee, as a person, how those two are necessarily married. I don't understand. In the workplace, personally, it's very different, right?
What would you say? Oh, no, sorry. Please continue your thought.
But I think the challenge.
Finally, no, go ahead.
So I think you have to separate the roles, right? So I think if you are experiencing this with a colleague, I think you're more likely to have the conversation because there's no power differential. I think once you go into a supervisory role, and I think people don't understand this often until they're in these roles. It's not so much that I am your boss and you're the employee. It's that I'm responsible for your work. You are too, but at the end of the day, especially in school settings, I am responsible for the outcome of these students' experience. And there isn't space in our conversation to also account for the fact that you may not like the way I comb my hair, or you may not like how I run meetings, you may think I'm too direct. Accommodate and adjust and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think part of the space is, we have, and it's also okay because it's a conflict, right? Because you want to invite people to the conversation. You want to invite them to the table. But ultimately, especially school-based structures, they are hierarchical. At the end of the day, there is a person who's responsible. And so you don't have the luxury of sort of every idea is welcome. At the end of the day, you can't accept every idea.
Yeah, no, I mean, so much of what you're saying resonates in conversations I've had with other professionals, and I think even some of my own experiences. Getting to the heart of how do you separate people as the professionals. Now, there's a lot of conversation that some would offer that you can't separate people. And to a certain extent, I think there is some truth to that. I don't discount, but also as you're articulating, right? My experience, I subscribe to exactly what you're saying, right? In order to protect and preserve and to strengthen and fortify, you have to be able to separate self from the professional because there's certain things that are required from you as a professional that you may not have to confront or conform to in your personal life.
Amen. Retweet or reacts or whatever it's called now.
Yeah.
And so, it's this very intimate dance in your own mind about you don't want to have split personalities, but you almost have to because, who you present with at work is not, Dr. P and Rick are two different people. And they've had to become two different people, one as a protection mechanism, but also like the jovial and lightheartedness of who I am as a friend, as a husband, as a brother, as a father is different than how we show up at work. Because again, as the role, and I think also, again, so when you think about workplace trauma, you always have to kind of put that person's trauma in the context of their situation. So how are they experiencing trauma, but what is the power structure around them? What is the dynamic around them? Because it also gives you insights into kind of where that's coming from.
And I will say,
I think...
Yeah. No, go ahead. I was just going to say...
I will say, after you, it's your part. I'm here to play.
No, I was just going to take what you said a step further. And I was even going to say some people or some contexts, some work professional settings don't deserve the real you. So you've talked about how we present and the dance we have to do, absolutely. But even some of the professional spaces don't deserve Rick or don't deserve Jonathan or don't deserve whoever you are. All the goodness and kindness and generosity and grace. So yeah, I just want to take that.
Well, again, to that point, I think part of what we also have to separate out too is, again, I think trauma, especially in the workplace, I don't know if one person necessarily is powerful enough to create trauma for you as an individual. I think they can create an uncomfortable environment. They could be rude. They could be unpleasant. They could be someone you don't want to be around. And they could be, in the case you gave earlier, outright hostile and disrespectful. I think the actual trauma, though, is when that person can set in motion a series of events that really
Oh,
then create the trauma. And I think what oftentimes folks don't appreciate is when you show up in the workplace, everyone's watching you, and regardless of your role. And if somebody is being openly hostile and rude or disrespectful, or in most experiences, it's not so in your face. It's much more covert. And we all love an anonymous online post, right? That's kind of the mechanism behind all of it. And there's no power in that because it's anonymous, but it also goes to creating a traumatic experience.
and so it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the distinction between an isolated event versus sort of this sequence or patterns. And then just to further connect the dots, when you talked about the institution itself not being the mechanism by which trauma is created, but it's the people in the institution, the actions, the intentional actions.
And I think
Yeah.
a differentiator could be too, like between a hostile experience and a traumatic experience. I think with a hostile experience, you can nip it in the bud. You can confront that person, that situation. Traumatic experience, you can't. Because it's much more systemic, it's much more pervasive, it's much more wide-ranging than an individual occurrence. But I also think, too, what's important that when you're recognizing workplace trauma is also to kind of recognize, too, and this takes some time, right? It takes some growth to get to this point, but you also have to recognize, too, 99% of the time, you as a person have nothing to do with the workplace trauma. There is something in the individual who's initiating that trauma that they're missing. There's some void, there's some gap, there's some absence from childhood or wherever, or there's their own trauma, and you have become the physical source of that experience.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, even as I think about the anecdote that I shared, right? Like, that event, hostile as it was, because I repressed it, didn't deal with it, it then began to show up in other contexts. And then that then helped to create the trauma I was experiencing, but not the isolated events itself.
Amen.
It was
It's the
when they were
response
all,
to the event.
yeah, yeah, the
Yes.
connection together.
Yes.
So that resonates.
And I think the thing that's also interesting, so the larger your role becomes professionally, the more susceptible you are, I think, to workplace trauma. And I think what is really important, because you become, again, do I really think of a superintendent who's coming under controversy for a policy, and this lady, it's in Illinois, is just being crucified, right? And the things we're saying about her are fairly unjust, unkind, it's really nasty, vitriolic behavior. But that's pretty common nowadays on social media. It is, the restraints are off, right? People just say whatever crazy thing comes to mind without regard, right? And so you have to step back. So I was working with her, and I said, not working with her, I was talking to her, right? And I said, you really have to step back. Let's call her Sheila. I said, Sheila, you have to recognize, too, a lot of these attacks about you personally, it's not you. Like, they don't know you. They have a perception of you. They have an idea of you, but there's no way they've ever gotten to know who you are. So these things are just saying because they've created a narrative on their own, which is none of your business and you aren't responsible for. And they're using it to fuel this kind of nonsense and this behavior. But you have to kind of step back as the leader and recognize there is something in those individuals that's missing or that's being attacked. And in many times, I think, to your point earlier, it comes down to fear. I don't think, again, I'm not a psychologist, that's my wife, but I don't think people come into the workspace wanting to do harm. I don't think they come in wanting to cause trauma. I think in many cases that is a response to something inside of them, a fear that either you are doing, you're causing, you're pushing, and the reaction is to that fear more than it is to you.
Yeah, well, so two things you said. One, it's so funny. So when I first became a principal, so my first year of the principalship, the superintendent who hired me, people talked a lot of shit about me, about, being too young, didn't deserve it, only got it because I was X, Y, and Z. I was
never to your
somebody's
face, of
favorite.
course. No,
Yeah,
I'm not going to have
never
these
to my face.
conversations.
Never to my face. And so I remember
That would
going
take
to,
courage.
yeah, it would take courage, and the risk of getting slapped. But we strive to be Christ-like.
Amen.
So she said the same thing. I went to her in sort of a vulnerable moment, saying, look, these people, and also the context that I entered, I'll talk about my years as a principal maybe somewhere down the road, but the context that I entered following a mentor of mine who, by many intents and purposes, was beloved, and whether you didn't like him, he did a lot to clean up the school. And so happy to succeed him, but it was just a lot of noise surrounding. But everyone else wasn't happy for me to succeed him. And so
Amen.
she said, you know what, Jonathan? She said, you know, people know Dr. Moore because I was doctor then. They don't know Jonathan, exactly to what you were saying.
Right.
And it still, it took me many years. It's not like that was like an awakening in that moment, but
A
the
decade.
conversation we're having, yeah, like in our 40s about, and now that I've matured in leadership
Amen.
and, you know, as a person, I can now see the distinction. But before I'm like, well, who the hell am I? Like
Right.
it was just this confusion. Like, what do you mean? They don't know. I'm
Yes.
Jonathan. I'm Dr. Moore. I show up to work as myself. Um, and I think through my own evolution came the awakening around what you were saying as a leader, right? You realize that there are some parts of you that you shouldn't or can't reveal in the
Hmm.
workplace. There's certain things you want to keep sacred and hidden for those who love you, respect you,
Hmm.
protect you. But I say that to say that that sentiment, if I could go back 15 years and tell my, you know, young principal self that, I would have had a bit of an easier time.
Amen. And I
Yeah,
also think back to like the errors you would have made, we wouldn't have made because
yeah,
because sometimes when you're in before you recognize the traumatic experience or the trauma or whatever it is, you aren't able to kind of step back and see what is the role you're playing in it. Because I do think that you do have to be cognizant of recognizing that, even though, and not to blame the victim, and not that people are necessarily victims of this, but as you're experiencing workplace trauma, you have to get very clear as to what is your role in it, because you aren't just this helpless damsel in distress. Like, you do have a role to play in it, and many times it comes, and then it's my own experience. It's because you act in a way as in defense to the trauma you're receiving. You don't have the skills at the time or the wisdom to recognize what it is. So you kind of rein in, you go to the core of who you are, and then you kind of defend that in a way that you don't have to defend it had you had the clearer awareness of it.
yeah. I mean, so much comes up when you say that. Um, yeah, so much comes up, and the whole idea of not of contributing to it. I think back to the experience that I mentioned at the top of the episode about how at least individuals sat there. Maybe some were stunned. Apparently, this was not uncommon behavior, but many surprised. And did I expect, so the 40-year-old me now, did I expect anyone in that moment to come to my defense to risk their jobs or her wrath? Probably not. The 17-year-old me would have thought that some adult in the room would have stood up and protected me. But apparently someone did it behind the scenes because, like I said, I never had any more interaction. So the adult me believes that someone had a conversation with someone because the adult me knows that that was hostility, it was disrespect, it was reprimandable, reprehensible, legal actionable, um,
Yes.
all the things that I didn't know as a 17-year-old who was just happy to be there. Um, so then let's pivot. So you've given us so much to think about and talk about with how we identify workplace trauma, where it comes from, how do we recognize the signs of it. So let's then pivot to, okay, we've done all those things. We've identified it, we've recognized it, we've put the patterns together. We've even started to take a look at our role in it, whether we are feeling the sense of trauma or maybe observing the trauma. What can we do? What do we do about it? What can
So I
we?
think it's important to isolate too because of it comes down to the core of the person, right? So I think in order to begin healing from workplace trauma, you have to make a very clear decision: are you going to stay in the environment, or are you going to leave the environment? Um, because I think your response it's going to be a little different based upon what you decide to do. And I will say, from my own personal experience as well as from the lived, walking with many other people who are sharing these traumatic experiences with me, you don't have to leave for it to get better. Absolutely not. So I think the first thing is you
Say
always have
more.
to. You don't have to leave because I think part of it is so much of the trauma you control without you even realizing it. There is a power in your response to the traumatic experience that either gives it gasoline or shuts it down.
You got to say
And I
more.
think you have to anchor into. So you have to. So right, so the first step then is it goes to knowing your why. So again, I think the first indicator of trauma is you're starting to question. So I'm the leader of an institution. Once you start questioning, am I qualified to do this? Should I be here? Am I fit? Once that starts, you have to stop and say, hold up. Simon Sinek has always said, start with your why. People are attracted to you because not of what you do, but because of why you do it. What is your purpose? Why are you here? Why are you doing this work? Is this divinely ordered? Yes or no? And if it isn't, get out of Dodge. Go somewhere else. And if it is, stop it. Stay there and own it. And so you have to know your why, because it's the singular most important grounding force in this journey. Because once you know your why, you're clear about who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're going to do it, how you're going to manage it, where you're going to take it. You need those 6 things for this to make any sense for you. So I think the first start is kind of recognizing, is this where you're supposed to be? And it can't be, many times people will run and say it isn't. And you have to be clear, if it isn't, it isn't because this is now uncomfortable, because it's challenging me, or am I really in, did I really listen to God's plan incorrectly? Did I miss the signs? Am I really in over my head? And, did I let my ego get in the way? Did I let other people call the shots for me? So you have to get clear on your why and your purpose. And it's what you really believe it is. It's not what others think you should do. It's not the advice of mentors. It's really to the core of it. And I think in this part of the process, you have to go quiet. You have to go still. And you have to just listen. The Spirit will tell you the answers. You just have to shut up enough for it to come to you.
Easier said than done. That's why I'm laughing. Right.
41 years in, we're just getting there.
Yeah, if only. Yeah. Okay, so know your why.
So that's the first step, know your why. And then you also have to have a solid core group of people, not part of that trauma, who can help you with reality check. And that's where I've been intentional with my entire career, is creating a solid network of superintendent, chief school business officials, private school presidents, religious brothers and priests and sisters, a wide network who will be honest with you and tell you, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. You're too personally connected, you're not connected enough. You're too engaged, you're too disengaged. They are the people who will then give you the core sense of really kind of not only reinforcing your why, but validating you did the appropriate check on that why. So know your why, anchor in that, get this core group. And then most important, I have to say secondly, the second most important thing is to identify in you, and this is where the power comes. So I know my why, I know why I'm here, I know what I'm doing, I know it's divinely ordered. I have a solid group that is reinforcing that because of their good intentions. What in me caused the traumatic response? Something in us, in all the trauma you can be in these workplaces, something in you is triggered by that. You have to name what it is, because if you don't name it, you can't stop it. You can't heal it. You can't address it. So for many of us,
if you don't name it, you can't stop it. You can't heal it. You can't address it.
Because you have to figure out what. So again, and I say this all the time, people's opinions of you are their business, not yours. However, you have a response to that opinion once you hear it. You have to figure out, why is that response what it is? What is the root cause of that unpleasant reaction? And then you have to work on that, because that is what's giving your own self the power to say what you want, do what you want. I know who I am. I know where I'm going. It's supported. Here's the direction. Here's why. And that no longer has any power over you. But that takes time. And you have to kind of dig deep and figure out, is it fear? Is it gossip? Is it abandonment? Is it isolation? Is it inferiority complex? It's one of those. It lies somewhere in that mix. But the trauma you're experiencing only has a traumatic impact on you because it's triggering that particular part of your development, your psyche, your emotional sense, whatever it might be. And then that's where that mentor group comes in play, because once you identify it, hopefully or ideally, you have a core group that you can then say, if my biggest fear, is abandonment, whatever that might be. Okay, something in this trauma is causing abandonment. Here's people in my circle who have experienced this, who can help me navigate it, who can help me walk through it, who can help me figure out how to repair it.
So, wow. This has been helpful to me, even if it helps no one else, but I think it's going to help anyone who listens. But especially when you talk about what in me. So, right, the podcast is called Return to More. And I talked about in the first episode why I named it Return to More, what that meant for me. And, as I sit here in my 40-year-old self, that has been the most difficult connection to make across many lines. What is it in me that is causing my reaction to these external forces that I'm giving such power to.
And have nothing to do with you, really. It really doesn't
Right,
have, because again,
right.
and I think that same rule, Johnny, applies, because then people who are acting out and causing the trauma, it's the same thing. You become the symbol of it, but there's something internally with them that your action, your ideal, your thought, your phrase, whatever, has caused. And that's just a response. So that's really where it goes to. And then I think, so Brene Brown does a lot of great work on leadership and identity and all those things. But I think the most important, one of the many important things I've taken from her, is the fourth key, I think. So first, know your why, build that core group, identify what was being damaged and triggered. And then once you have all that, you have to set boundaries. Internal boundaries and external boundaries. Most importantly, internally. Boundaries prevent the trauma from continually happening internally. Brene Brown says often, clear is kind. Be very clear with yourself and with others who you are, what you will accept, and what you will not accept. And it's very easy to say to a team or to a school community, here's what I will not accept from this community. I will not accept lazy effort. I will not accept gossip. I will not accept unnecessary ridicule or unwarranted feedback. It's easy to say to them. It's much harder to say to yourself. It's much harder to say, I will not allow myself to give credit where credit isn't due. I will not allow myself to be subject and worry about the perceptions of others when you know those perceptions are based in La La Land. It's very hard to do that. But if you know your why and you got that core group, and you identify what about you that trauma was hurting you internally, that boundary then comes into play.
Yeah, one of the sayings I've adopted, right? So I think the book of Hebrews tells us God's grace is sufficient. I always say his is sufficient, mine is not. Um,
Right.
but even more so when it comes to self. Like, as I've learned over the course of the years, I can extend grace, and I often have to, people who, may or may not have deserved it to the extent to which they might, who am I to judge? But nevertheless, when it comes to my role or my contributions or my actions or my even thoughts of myself, being compassionate and graceful towards self, I
It's very
have
hard.
found has been one of the most
It's
difficult
very hard.
things in
Because you
growth and
are,
development.
because I think, at least for folks like you and I, we hold ourselves to the highest standards. Folks may not see that, value that, appreciate that, but not only are we our biggest critics, but because we've come through such a very different experience to get to where we are. It wasn't easy. It wasn't handed. And that's part of what causes this reaction when you're first being traumatized is you're attacking the core of who I am and you don't even know who I
Yes.
am.
Yes.
You can't begin to
Yes.
understand the complexity of the
Yes.
life I have lived. All you see is what you think. All you see is what you want to see. Is you've created this perception, and you go for blood there. Yeah, but I think yeah, paper pens don't matter. And the other thing too, when it comes down to this, I forget the actual quote now from scripture, but it's more or less that God equips the called. And I think you have to recognize early on that if you are listening to where you think you're supposed to be going, you are equipped. You may not be what you need at the particular moment, but you do have the foundational skills and the set and the fortitude and the perseverance to get where you want to go. And that's, I think, a primary difference with trauma too, especially in workplace settings. I think there are two sorts of leaders, right? I think you've got leaders who experience traumatic experiences, don't do the work, leave, and continually experience it time and time and time again. And then there are leaders who experience it, or employees who experience it, do the work, and are better because of it. The trauma could still exist, but who you are is stronger. The work you're producing is stronger. The outcomes are more aligned.
Yeah, I mean, and we could be here all day. I know we're getting close to time, but I think part of our conversation, in case the listener hasn't become aware, we both are Christians, we love the Lord and all the things. And I think there's something to be said when you talked about just recently the idea of, he doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies those who he called. And that may be Jeremiah. It's one of those prophets who said it. It's okay. It's in the book. Um,
I say with
but
confidence, it could be wrong. I'm going to get Jeremiah. Wait, I don't really know that. I
that's
think it
fine.
is. Sounds like it is. I may have
Somebody will
seen it
tell us
on the
in the
slogan.
comments. Yeah, somebody will tell us in the comments. But I
They
think
will.
also from a spiritual perspective, that also plays a role because there have been instances in my life where I've been blessed with a position or with an experience that I know that I didn't necessarily deserve.
Or are
Not to mean
prepared
that I
for.
couldn't do it right, that I couldn't do it, but nevertheless, because God is as good as He is, graced and blessed and made a way and helped me evolve and develop in the process. But there was also that disconnect for me. So as I think in terms of like a spiritual being to like, this is Jonathan in the real world, there was sort of a dissonance that I had to, navigate. Because spiritually, like, yeah, I'm here. God put me here. He'll equip me. I don't know what I'm doing. But then, yeah, when I'm actually on the ground and don't know what I'm doing, and people are like, you don't know what you're doing.
But amen, bro. But to that point, this is the thing, that this is what I learned. It took me a decade to get there, right? Is He equips the called, but you have to do the work to get equipped. There has to be a certain humility, which I didn't possess, to recognize like you are in this role. You probably, in retrospect, would not put you in that role again because you weren't ready for that role. But who are you to say what God can and can't do? You're in that space. You have to do the work then to also get equipped. He'll give you the resources. He'll give you the strength. He'll give you the fortitude. He'll give you the power to do it. But you also have to have the humility to step away from the PhD, to step away from the title, and to do the work you have to do to make that come to life. But that also takes time. You have to go through the experience, recognize, and in some ways that lack of humility, that lack of awareness is what caused, in many cases, the early trauma.
Amen. Yeah, I don't know that. We could obviously be here all day, but I want to leave on that note. So as we turn to our segment, More to Carry With You, I mean, you shared so much. I can't even capture it, but I think the most salient points are when you talked about how do we essentially navigate, overcome. You said, know your why. And that I think resonates with so many of us, being crystal clear around why we're in the places we are or doing the work we're doing. And then I think the second thing you said was having a solid core group of people. I will tell you, I'm so blessed to be able to have this podcast because that's what this season has been about, featuring some of those closest people to me who have been with me throughout different walks of my life. And I can attest personally that is essential. You probably said the hardest, which is to be introspective, right? Returning to more. What in me is responding or causing my response in this way or causing my feeling or reaction? And of course, you walked us around like the different dynamics that personalities play and how people project, which perhaps with the other Dr. Piwowarski, we may get into
the clinical projection.
In the textbook fashion. And then I think the last one, which is how I started the episode, is one of the keys in which I used to return to more, was setting boundaries. And it's so hard. You and I, very similar to a certain extent, family dynamics and positions in our families. And to a certain extent, we were pleasers. I think we've evolved to better set boundaries. But when you want to do well, you want to make people happy, you want to demonstrate, gratitude, and you want to demonstrate appreciation, it can cause you to overlook certain boundaries with some of the people most closest to you.
I call it making unfair accommodations.
Conversation.
Yes.
Yes. So, my gosh, thank you so much, Rick.
Pleasure,
it has been a pleasure having you on this show. This episode has helped me, and I know it'll help our audience. Listen, if you've enjoyed today's episode and my conversation with Rick, I ask you to not only like the episode, but please subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can also visit the website, returntomore.com, for all the episodes and all things related to Return to More. And until next time, remember, know your why, have a solid core group of people, understand what is in you that's causing you to think and feel the way you do, and then remember to set boundaries. And that is how you can navigate not only workplace trauma, but perhaps many other types of trauma. Until next time, be well.